My name is Liam, I'm 32 years old, and I own a high-end construction and renovation company. To my family, however, for the longest time, I was just a handyman. The reliable one, the boring one, the one who was supposed to be the safety net. That all changed with a single phone call from an ocean away. My older brother, Josh, the golden child, the charismatic face of the family, called me from the lobby of the boutique hotel he supposedly ran in Hawaii. His voice, usually so full of breezy confidence, was tight with a panic he couldn't quite conceal. He skipped the pleasantries, the fake interest in my life. He just asked the question, the one that detonated our family's entire fragile ecosystem. "Liam," he said, his voice strained, "where is your wife?" He didn't ask how she was. He didn't even use her name. Sarah. Just your wife, as if she were a possession, an object he needed to locate. And in that moment, I knew this was it. This was the beginning of the end for the life they had built on my back. I took a slow breath, looking out my office window at the city skyline my company had helped shape, and I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer than was comfortable. I let him stew in his own desperation. I began, my voice calm, steady, and utterly devoid of the panic he was feeling, is exactly where she needs to be. Why? The story I'm about to tell you is about how that one question led to my family losing everything they thought they were entitled to, and how I finally claimed the respect I had been denied my entire life. Before I continue, I want you to do something for me. If you've ever felt like the family ATM, the forgotten child, or the designated problem solver, drop a comment below and just write "I see you," and if you've ever had to build your own future from scratch because no one else would help you, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. You need to hear how this ends. The roots of that phone call were planted decades ago, in the soil of a childhood where the roles were assigned early and enforced without mercy. My brother, Josh, was born shining. That's how my mother always put it. He had a magnetic personality, an easy smile, and a talent for making people feel like they were the center of the universe, as long as he needed something from them. He was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets orbiting him, our purpose to reflect his light. I was cast as the moon, quiet, dependable, and largely invisible unless I was needed to illuminate a path for him in the dark. Our home was a living monument to this dynamic. Josh's soccer trophies lined the mantelpiece, his art projects were framed on the walls, his academic awards, few as they were treated like Nobel Prizes. My report cards, always filled with straight A's, were met with a cursory "That's nice, Liam," before being placed on the fridge, only to be buried under a new picture of Josh at the beach. For his 16th birthday, a gleaming red convertible appeared in the driveway, a gift from my parents to celebrate his potential for mine. A year later, I received a monthly bus pass and a stern lecture from my father about the importance of hard work and responsibility. I remember his exact words, spoken as he looked not at me, but at Josh, who was tossing the keys to his new car in the air. "Josh is the face of the family," my dad said, a puff of pride in his chest. "You, Liam, you're the engine. Engines don't need praise, they just need to run." That was my purpose. To run. To be reliable. To be the silent, functioning machine that powered the family's ambitions for their golden boy. When Josh decided he wanted to major in hospitality management, my parents took out a second mortgage on our home to send him to a prestigious and expensive private university. When I graduated high school with honors and a desire to study architecture, I was sat down and told that money was tight. "You're good with your hands," my father said dismissively. "Get a trade. It's steady. You can start earning right away." There was no discussion. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a directive. The engine didn't get to choose the destination. So, I did. I started working, taking any job I could find, landscaping, roofing, framing. I was the one who fixed the leaky faucet in my parents' bathroom, patched the drywall after Josh put his fist through it during an argument, and rebuilt the back deck on weekends while Josh was off networking with his college friends. I never asked for a dime. I was just the engine, doing what engines do. I was resentful, yes, but underneath the resentment, a different feeling was taking root: determination. I realized, in the quiet solitude of my work, that they had inadvertently given me a gift. By expecting nothing from them, I learned to expect everything from myself. While my family was pouring all their resources and emotional energy into Project Josh, I was quietly building my own world, brick by brick. My salvation came in the form of a man named Arthur Henderson. He was a retired general contractor who lived a few blocks over, a gruff, silver-haired man with hands like worn leather. He hired me to rebuild his dilapidated garden shed when I was 17. He watched me work for 3 days straight, barely saying a word. He observed how I measured twice, how I squared every corner perfectly, how I swept up my sawdust at the end of each day. On the final day, he came out with 2 glasses of iced tea and handed one to me. "You don't work like a boy," he said, his voice raspy. "You work like a craftsman." It was the most profound praise I had ever received. Mr. Henderson saw what my own father never did: potential. He took me under his wing, transforming from my employer into my mentor. He taught me more than just carpentry, he taught me the business. He showed me how to read blueprints, how to estimate jobs, how to manage subcontractors, and most importantly, how to value my own labor. "Never let anyone tell you what you're worth, son," he'd say, tapping his temple. "You set the price. If the work is good, they'll pay it." He became the father figure I craved, offering guidance without expectation, praise without agenda. I worked for other contractors during the day and spent my evenings with Mr. Henderson, absorbing every ounce of his 40 years of experience. I lived like a monk, saving every dollar I made, shunning the frivolous expenses my brother embraced. While Josh was posting pictures from ski trips and spring break in Cancun, I was putting a down payment on a used work van. While he was buying rounds of drinks for his friends, I was buying high-quality tools. I got my contractor's license at 24. I started small, with Liam's handyman services. My family thought it was quaint. "Good for you, Liam," my mother would say with a tight, pitying smile. "It's good to have a little something for yourself." They had no idea. I was meticulous. My work was flawless, and my reputation grew by word of mouth. I started getting bigger jobs, then bigger ones. I incorporated, changing the name to Northwood Construction. I was still the only employee, but the name sounded impressive. Then came Sarah. I was hired to do a massive renovation of a downtown office suite for a wealth management firm. She was a junior financial planner there, smart, focused, and with a no-nonsense energy that I found captivating. She noticed me, not as a laborer, but as the man running the entire project. She'd ask intelligent questions about the work, about my business. She saw the spreadsheets I used, the timelines I managed, the complex logistics I coordinated. One afternoon, she found me eating my lunch in my van, reviewing invoices. She knocked on the window. "You're not a handyman," she said, more a statement than a question. "You're a CEO without a C-suite." She was the first person to see the full picture. With her encouragement and financial acumen, Northwood Construction exploded. We niched down into luxury residential and commercial projects. She helped me structure my business, secure lines of credit, and invest the profits wisely. My secret success was no longer a secret to me and her. To my family, I was still just Liam, the reliable engine, puttering along with his little tool belt. They had no idea I was building an empire. Back on the phone, the silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken history. Josh's panicked breathing was the only sound. "Why?" I repeated, my tone unyielding. "What do you need my wife for, Josh?" He finally broke. The story tumbled out in a torrent of excuses and blame. The hotel, the one my parents had proudly told everyone their son managed, was a catastrophe. It turned out my parents hadn't just helped him, they had bought the place for him, sinking their entire retirement and the equity from that second mortgage into his Hawaiian dream. Josh, with his charm and zero business sense, had run it straight into the ground. He'd hired his friends, camped rooms for anyone with a pretty face, and treated the hotel's bank account like his personal wallet. The online reviews were brutal, mismanaged, dirty, unprofessional. Now, the bills were due. The bank was calling. He was on the verge of losing everything. I need money, Liam, he finally choked out, the entitlement dripping from every word. A lot of it. The bank wants $250,000 by the end of the month, or they're going to foreclose. I just listened. I didn't offer sympathy. I didn't say a word. Liam? Did you hear me? He asked, a frantic edge to his voice. I know you've got your little business. You must have some savings. Or you could get a loan. You've got good credit, right? You're responsible. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. My responsibility was now his lifeline. Before I could respond, I heard fumbling and my mother's voice came on the line, already laced with that familiar, cloying tone of emotional manipulation. Liam, honey? It's Mom. Your brother. He's in trouble. Real trouble. You can't let this happen to him. We're family. You have to help your family. I could picture her perfectly, clutching the phone, her face a mask of worried sincerity that she could conjure on command. Then, my father's gruff voice took over, booming with authority. Listen to me, Liam. There's no discussion here. We sacrificed everything for your brother's dream. We put our future on the line for him. Now it's your turn. This is your duty as a son and a brother. You will find a way to get that money. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They weren't asking, they were demanding. They saw me not as a person, but as a resource. A tool to be used to fix the mess their golden child had made. They had no idea who they were talking to. They had no idea the power had already shifted, long before this phone call. They thought they were talking to the engine. They were about to find out they were talking to the bank. The desperation escalated quickly. Within 48 hours, Josh and my parents were on a flight back from Hawaii, their failed tropical dream collapsing behind them. They demanded what they called a family meeting. The venue was my father's old office, a place of power where he had delivered countless lectures to me about my place in the world. It was a calculated move, meant to put me back in the box of the subordinate son. The evening before the meeting, my Aunt Carol called me. She was my mother's sister, a kind woman who had always seen the family's skewed dynamics with a clarity my parents lacked. Liam, be careful, she warned, her voice low. I spoke to your mother. This isn't a meeting, it's an ambush. They've already got loan application documents from their bank, and they expect you to sign as a guarantor. Your father is convinced he can order you to do it. I thanked her for the warning, but I was already prepared. The next evening, I didn't go to my father's office alone. Sarah was with me, her presence a quiet statement of solidarity. She held a sleek leather portfolio. I held an identical one. We walked in to find the three of them seated around the large mahogany desk, their faces a mixture of anxiety and grim determination. A stack of papers from the bank was sitting squarely in the middle. My father started immediately, foregoing any pretense of a greeting. Liam, we don't have time for games, he began, his voice taking on the booming tone he used when he expected no argument. Your brother made some mistakes, we all know that. But family is family. We bail each other out. You are going to co-sign these loans, and we are going to fix this. I let him finish. I let the weight of his command hang in the air. Then, I calmly placed my portfolio on the desk, sliding it across the polished wood. I didn't open it. I just looked at him. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the room like a thunderclap. My father's face flushed with anger. What did you just say to me? Before he could launch into a tirade, I opened my portfolio. Inside weren't loan applications, but the pristine, professionally bound financials of Northwood Construction. I turned it around for them to see. Page after page of assets, revenue streams, investment summaries, and property holdings. A multi-million-dollar valuation certified by a top accounting firm. You seem to be under a misapprehension, I said, my voice as cool as the glass in the skyscrapers my company helped build. I'm not a handyman. I own and operate one of the most successful private construction firms in the state. I don't need to co-sign a loan for $250,000. Their faces went from anger to utter, slack-jawed shock. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Josh just stared, his eyes wide with disbelief. But I wasn't finished. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out one more document. I slid it across the desk, right on top of their useless loan papers. The reason I know you're in financial trouble isn't just because of the hotel, I continued. It's because you defaulted on the second mortgage for this very house 3 months ago. The bank was preparing to foreclose. But they didn't. I tapped the paper. They sold the debt. And my company, operating through a blind trust that Sarah set up, bought it. I own your mortgage. I own your house. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face went from red to a ghastly, bloodless white. My mother started to make a small, whimpering sound. Josh looked from the paper to my face and back again, his brain unable to process the complete and total reversal of our universe. The engine had just bought the whole damn car. The first to speak was my mother, her voice a trembling whisper. Liam. How could you? After everything we've done for you. The sheer, breathtaking irony of that question hung in the room, thick and suffocating. Everything they had done for me? They had ignored me, dismissed me, and tried to shape me into a tool for their own convenience. My father, recovering from the initial shock, tried to reclaim his authority, his voice sputtering. This is my house. You can't. You can't do this. This is a trick. But his eyes were locked on the legally binding deed of trust in front of him, and the bluster in his voice was hollow. It was Josh, however, whose reaction was the most revealing, the most purely transactional. A slow, greedy smile spread across his face as the gears in his head finally clicked into place. He looked at me, a new kind of light in his eyes. So, he said, leaning forward eagerly. This is great. You don't need to co-sign anything. You can just give me the money. It's nothing to you, right? $250,000? You can just write a check. Problem solved. He actually looked relieved. He saw my success not as something I had earned, but as a bigger, better resource for him to exploit. He didn't see a brother who had outsmarted and outworked him, he saw a bigger wallet. That was the moment my last lingering shred of sentimental duty evaporated. I stood up slowly. Sarah stood with me, her hand resting supportively on my arm. I looked directly at Josh, then at my parents. My voice was calm, measured, and final. No, I said again. I am not giving you a single cent. The hotel is your failure, Josh. You made your choices, and now you will live with the consequences. I then turned my gaze to my parents. Mom, Dad. You chose to gamble your financial future on a bad bet. That was your decision. As for this house, I tapped the deed again. The situation is very simple. My company is now your lender. Mortgage payments are due on the 1st of the month, to my accounts department. The address is on the letterhead. I suggest you are not late. I picked up my portfolio and Sarah's. I walked towards the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. I looked back at the three of them, frozen in a tableau of disbelief and horror. For my entire life, you told me my role was to be the responsible one. And you were right. My responsibility now is to my own life, to my own company, and to my own family, I said, nodding towards Sarah. And that's a responsibility I take very seriously. This meeting is over. I walked out of that office and closed the door behind me, leaving them in the ruins of the world they had built. For the first time in my life, I felt the chains of their expectations fall away. I wasn't an engine anymore. I was free. The days following the meeting were a deluge of digital desperation. My phone became a weapon aimed directly at my resolve. The attack was two-pronged, a classic pincer movement of guilt and aggression. My mother handled the guilt front. She left long, rambling voicemails, her voice thick with manufactured tears. Liam, you're tearing this family apart, she'd cry. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. The stress you're causing is going to kill him. How can you be so cruel? I don't know who you've become. She sent texts filled with old family photos, pictures of me and Josh as smiling children, with captions like, Remember when we were a family? Remember when you loved your brother? It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to weaponize my own memories against me. My father, on the other hand, chose aggression. His voicemails were short, clipped, and full of impotent rage. You think you're a big shot now? You're nothing but a greedy little boy playing with things you don't understand. You will regret this, Liam. I promise you that this was often followed a day later by a message in a completely different tone, one of strained, awkward pleading, suggesting we can still work this out if you'll just be reasonable. Josh's attempts were the most pathetic. He tried to appeal to a brotherhood that had only ever existed in his times of need. He sent texts like, "Hey bro, seriously, let's just talk. I'll pay you back, I swear." We're blood, man, but I knew his promises were as empty as the hotel's bank account. This is where my chosen family became my fortress. Sarah was magnificent. She fielded every official communication, setting up a separate email address and phone number for Northwood Capital, the subsidiary we had created to handle the mortgage. Her replies were professional, impersonal, and utterly unshakable, referencing payment dates and late fees with the cold efficiency of a seasoned banker. It drove my parents insane. My mentor, Mr. Henderson, called me after he got wind of the situation through the contractor grapevine. He didn't offer pity. He offered validation. "I always knew you had a steel backbone, son," he chuckled. "Glad to see you're finally using it to stand up straight instead of just to haul lumber." My Aunt Carol acted as a reluctant spy, texting me snippets of the family's meltdown. They were trying to rally extended family against me, painting me as a heartless monster who had stolen his parents' home. But as Aunt Carol reported, most of the family had been borrowing money from my parents for years to cover their own poor decisions, and their sympathy was limited. "They're realizing the bank of Mom and Dad is officially closed," she texted. "Suddenly, they're all experts in financial responsibility." I blocked their numbers. I set up a rule that sent their emails directly to a folder I never opened. I held firm, weathering the storm not with anger, but with a profound and growing sense of peace. The silence I was imposing was not a punishment, it was a boundary. And for the first time, my life was being lived on my side of that line. Consequences are a force of nature. You can ignore them, you can deny them, but you cannot avoid them. My family was about to learn that lesson in the harshest way possible. Without my bailout, Josh's Hawaiian dream evaporated. The bank foreclosed on the hotel, and he was forced to return to the mainland in disgrace, his tail between his legs. He moved back into his childhood bedroom at the age of 34, a failed hotelier with nothing to his name but a fading tan and a mountain of debt. The weight of supporting a grown, unemployed man, combined with the full mortgage payments they were now forced to make to my company, shattered my parents' fragile finances. They missed the first payment. Sarah sent a polite, automated reminder. They missed the second. Sarah sent a formal letter outlining the default clauses in their contract. The panic set in. They tried to find another lender, but their credit was destroyed, and no bank would touch them. Their only option was to sell the house. And because I held the note, they had to go through me. I was determined to be fair, but not generous. I hired the best real estate agent in their area and instructed them to list the house at fair market value. It sold quickly. After the original bank's first mortgage was paid off and my own second mortgage was satisfied, there was some money left over. It was enough for them to secure a small, two-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town, but it was a fraction of the wealth they had once held in their home's equity. Their pride, their status, the physical monument to their life's work, was gone. The face of the family, Josh, had to swallow his pride and take a job as a rental car agent at the airport. The irony of him handing keys to other people was not lost on me. Meanwhile, the engineer was thriving. With the drama behind us, Sarah and I took our first real vacation, a month in Italy. We walked through Rome, drank wine in Tuscany, and lay on the beaches of the Amalfi Coast. It was a trip I could have afforded for years, but one I had never felt I had the peace of mind to take. I was healing. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to be whole. I spent hours talking through the decades of neglect, of feeling invisible, of believing my worth was tied to my utility. Slowly, painfully, I began to unpack the baggage they had forced me to carry. I was building a new life, a life not defined by their expectations or their failures, but by my own values, my own successes, and my own profound, hard-won peace. About 6 months after my parents moved into their apartment, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. It was my mother. Her voice was different, stripped of the manipulative tears and the forced cheerfulness. It was quiet, thin, and sounded old. "Liam," she said, and there was no demand in it, only a question. I'm sorry to bother you. I know you don't want to talk to us." I stayed silent, waiting. "I was just calling to say. I was thinking about that back deck you built for us," she continued, her voice wavering slightly. "You were only 19. You spent every weekend on it for a whole summer. You never even let your father pay you for the wood. You just did it. We had so many family dinners out there." She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "We never said thank you properly. We just expected it. I'm sorry for that, Liam. I'm sorry we never saw how hard you were always working. We were so focused on Josh, we were wrong. It wasn't a perfect, all-encompassing apology that wiped the slate clean. It couldn't be. But it was specific. It was genuine. It was a crack of light in a door that had been sealed shut for a lifetime. It was a start. I agreed to meet her for coffee the following week, in a neutral public place, and on one condition: she came alone. We sat at a small table, the air between us awkward but not hostile. I laid out the new terms of our relationship. There would be no more money. There would be no more guilt trips. There would be no more discussions about Josh's problems. Our relationship, if it was to exist at all, would be built on a foundation of mutual respect, a respect I had earned and now demanded. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes, but this time they felt real. She told me my father was struggling. His pride was shattered, and he found it almost impossible to admit he was wrong, but he had started telling people, quietly, that his son owned a successful company. It was his own clumsy way of acknowledging my reality. Josh, she admitted, was still bitter and resentful, blaming me for his downfall. "That's his burden to carry," I said, and she didn't argue. Our coffee meeting wasn't a grand reconciliation. It was a tentative handshake across a chasm. The old family was gone forever. But in its place, there was the potential for something new, something more honest, and something built not on obligation, but on a fragile, emerging respect. Looking back on it all now, sitting here in the home Sarah and I built, not renovated, but built from the ground up, to our exact specifications, I see the journey with a clarity that only comes from distance. For so long, I believed my value was conditional. I thought that if I just worked harder, was more dependable, fixed one more problem, that one day they would finally turn to me and say, "We see you. We're proud of you." I was trapped in a cage of seeking their validation, and the door was wide open the entire time. The moment I stopped needing their approval was the moment I truly became powerful. My success wasn't built on spite or revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. My actions were driven by something far colder and more powerful: consequences. I didn't take their house to punish them, I took control of my own life, and the loss of their house was simply a byproduct of their own choices colliding with my refusal to enable them any longer. The true meaning of family is a lesson I had to learn outside of my own bloodline. My family is Mr. Henderson, who saw a craftsman when my father saw a tool. It's my friends, who celebrated my successes when my own family didn't even know they were happening. And most of all, it's Sarah, my wife, my partner, the co-architect of my life, who saw a king when I still thought I was a pawn. The greatest lesson in all of this is that you cannot force someone to respect you. You can only create a situation where they have no other choice but to do so. Your self-worth isn't a gift someone else gives you, it's a boundary you draw yourself. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for the people who are supposed to love you is to get out of their way and let them fall. It's not about watching them suffer, It's about giving them the opportunity to learn to stand on their own 2 feet. My story had a difficult, painful, but ultimately liberating ending. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have written the check? Would you have walked away sooner? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose yourself over a toxic dynamic, hit that subscribe button and share this video. It's important to remember, especially when you feel most alone, that you are not the engine for someone else's dream. You are the architect of your own.